No one ever sat you down and told you the most dangerous truth about becoming a man. Not because your father was cruel, not because he wanted you weak, but because the advice required to survive adulthood is the kind of knowledge that destabilizes comfort, challenges authority, and forces confrontation with reality. So it remained unspoken. Your father taught you how to behave. He taught you how to be acceptable, be respectful, be honest. Work hard, don't cause trouble. These lessons were safe, socially approved, easy to explain. But what he didn't teach you, what he couldn't teach you, was how the world actually works when morality collides with power. This documentary is about that silence. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you. Because adulthood does not reward goodness the way childhood does. And men who grow up believing it will often discover the truth too late, after being sidelined, betrayed, ignored, or quietly replaced. Your father grew up in a different ecosystem. Authority was visible, rules were clearer, hierarchies were stable. If you followed the path, you were usually protected. In that world, moral behavior often did correlate with survival. But that world no longer exists. Today, power is indirect. Consequences are delayed. Betrayal is subtle. And the men who succeed are rarely the ones who announce their intentions or follow the rules as written. This shift is precisely why the advice your father gave you, though well-meaning, became incomplete. And why the advice he didn't give you became dangerous. He never told you that respect is conditional. He never told you that silence often means judgment, not approval. He never told you that being a good man can make you predictable and therefore exploitable. Not because he didn't know these things existed, but because saying them out loud would have forced a reckoning with his own compromises. This is the first uncomfortable truth. Many fathers passed down morality because they were never taught strategy. They survived by adapting quietly, not by understanding the system. So what they gave you was behavior, not awareness. And behavior without awareness is a liability. Think about the advice that was emphasized. Keep your head down. Don't argue. Let your work speak for itself. These rules train compliance, patience, and hope. They assume fairness. They assume good faith. They assume that someone is watching and keeping score. But adult power structures do not operate on fairness. They operate on leverage, perception, and replaceability. And no one announces when you're losing. This is where the danger begins. Men who internalize only fatherly advice enter adulthood with an outdated operating system. They assume effort leads to recognition. They assume loyalty is remembered. They assume restraint is respected. When these assumptions fail, and they often do, the shock is profound. Confusion turns into bitterness. Bitterness turns into withdrawal, and many men never understand why things went wrong. They only know that something feels rigged. The dangerous advice your father never taught you isn't about manipulation or cruelty. It's about calibration. Knowing when morality protects you and when it exposes you. Knowing when silence is strength and when it's surrender. Knowing that the world does not punish you for being immoral, it punishes you for being naive. Your father likely believed that if he raised you to be decent, the world would meet you halfway. That belief made sense in his time. But in modern systems, corporate, social, relational, decency without boundaries becomes an open door. This documentary does not attack fathers. It explains them. It separates intent from outcome. Your father gave you what kept him safe, but safety and dominance are not the same thing. Stability and survival are not identical, and here is the most dangerous part of all. No one corrects you when your father's advice stops working. There is no warning. No transition ceremony, no manual. You are simply expected to adapt, quietly, or be filtered out. That is why this advice remained unspoken, because it contradicts everything you were told about being a good man, because it forces you to confront uncomfortable trade-offs, and because once you see it, you can't unsee it. This film exists to name that silence, to examine what was withheld, not out of malice, but out of limitation. And to understand how men who never received this dangerous advice walk into adulthood unarmed, trusting rules that no longer apply. In the sections ahead, we will break down the specific truths your father never taught you, not as tactics to dominate others, but as lenses to protect yourself from misunderstanding the world you're actually living in. Because the most dangerous advice is not bad advice. It's the advice you never knew you needed, until the cost of not having it became impossible to ignore. To understand the most dangerous advice your father never taught you, you must first understand why it was never taught, not emotionally, structurally. This omission was not an accident. It was the result of fear, constraint, and inheritance. Most fathers do not raise sons to win power games. They raise sons to survive without causing friction. That distinction matters. Your father lived in a system where stability depended on compliance. Jobs lasted decades. Social roles were rigid. Deviating from expectations carried visible, immediate punishment. In that environment, morality wasn't just virtue, it was armor. Being predictable, agreeable, and respectable reduced risk. It kept food on the table. It avoided attention from authority. So morality became the lesson. Reality became the burden he carried alone. This is the first reason the dangerous advice was never taught. Teaching reality would have undermined the strategy that kept him safe. To tell you that fairness is optional, loyalty is conditional, and power is rarely transparent would have forced him to admit that his own sacrifices weren't noble, they were necessary. That's a hard truth to hand to a child. Instead, he handed you rules. Rules feel clean. Rules feel teachable. Rules create the illusion of control, but rules only work in systems that enforce them consistently. Modern systems do not. Another reason fathers avoided this advice is psychological inheritance. Men tend to pass down what worked just enough for them. Your father may have endured exploitation, silence, or disrespect, but he endured it. Survival becomes validation. If he lived through it, the logic goes, so will you. This creates a dangerous bias. Suffering is mistaken for wisdom. But endurance without understanding does not translate into guidance. It translates into silence. Many fathers knew something was wrong with the system, but lacked the language, permission, or courage to articulate it. So they defaulted to values. Values are safe. Values are unquestioned. Values don't require confrontation. Reality does. There is also a moral fear fathers carry, the fear of creating a son who becomes ruthless, arrogant, or dangerous. Teaching a child how power actually works feels like handing them a weapon without a safety lock. So fathers soften the message. They teach restraint without teaching leverage. They teach kindness without teaching boundaries. The result is not a better man. It is a less prepared one. This is where the danger compounds. A man raised on morality alone expects the world to reward intention. When it doesn't, he assumes the failure is internal. He works harder. He becomes quieter. He tries to be even better. Meanwhile, the system interprets his silence as weakness, not virtue, and no one corrects him. Fathers rarely explain that authority does not care how moral you are. It cares how replaceable you are. They don't explain that silence from leadership often signals evaluation, not trust. They don't explain that loyalty is remembered only when it's scarce. Why? Because saying these things would force a son to question every institution he's told to respect. And institutions depend on unexamined respect. This is the hidden social contract. Raise moral men, not formidable ones. Moral men follow rules. Formidable men understand when rules are selectively enforced. Fathers, consciously or not, are often agents of this contract, not because they agree with it, but because resisting it risks instability. There is also shame involved. Many fathers feel they fail to protect themselves. Teaching you how to avoid those same traps would require revisiting moments where they stayed silent, complied, or surrendered ground. Silence becomes a defense mechanism, not just for you, but for them. So instead of saying, "The world will test you," they say, "Be patient." Instead of saying, people will exploit predictability, they say, be consistent. Instead of saying, you will be judged before you are understood, they say, just be yourself. Each of these is incomplete advice. Not wrong, but unfinished. This is the core tragedy behind the most dangerous advice your father never taught you. He prepared you for a world that no longer exists, using tools that once worked but now expose you. And the world will not tell you this gently. It will show you through stalled careers, one-sided relationships, quiet exclusions, and moments where effort does not equal outcome. These moments feel personal. They are not. They are structural. Your father gave you morality because morality kept him safe. But safety and clarity are not the same thing, and men raised only on safety grow up confused when clarity becomes necessary. This documentary is not about rejecting your father's values. It is about understanding their limits. Morality without situational awareness becomes a vulnerability. Respect without leverage becomes submission. Silence without strategy becomes erasure. The advice your father never taught you was dangerous because it destabilizes comforting myths. It reveals that goodness is not a shield, that systems reward perception over intention, and that adulthood demands more than being well-behaved. The most dangerous moment for a man raised on fatherly advice is not failure. It is realization. The realization that the rules he lived by no longer apply and may never have applied at all. This is where the most dangerous advice your father never taught you begins to reveal its cost. Boyhood lessons are built for supervision. Adult power games are built for ambiguity. The transition between the two is never announced, and no one pauses the system to explain that the game has changed. As a boy, you were rewarded for compliance. You followed instructions, respected authority, waited your turn. Adults noticed. Teachers intervened. Parents protected you from consequences that exceeded your understanding. The system was visible, and its boundaries were enforced. That structure trained trust, but adulthood removes the referee. Power in adult systems, workplaces, social hierarchies, institutions, operates without moral narration. No one explains why someone else was promoted. No one clarifies why loyalty went unrewarded. No one tells you when you've been quietly deprioritized. And crucially, no one tells you when your behavior is being interpreted as weakness rather than virtue. This is the gap your father never warned you about. He taught you how to behave within a system. He did not teach you how to read one. Adult power games are not governed by stated rules. They are governed by incentives. Status is inferred, not declared. Influence is measured indirectly by who is listened to, who is protected, who is replaceable. Men raised on boyhood logic assume transparency. They believe effort will be seen, intentions will be understood, and fairness will eventually correct imbalance. When that correction never comes, they don't recognize the system. They blame themselves. This is where confusion turns inward. A man who believes the rules are fair will interpret injustice as personal failure. He works harder. He speaks less. He waits longer. These responses feel moral, but they worsen his position, because adult systems do not reward patience by default. They reward leverage. And leverage is never taught in childhood. Your father likely believed that adulthood was simply a longer version of boyhood with more responsibility. It is not. It is a different arena entirely. One where silence can signal irrelevance, not maturity. Where humility can be mistaken for low value. Where obedience can mark you as safe to overlook. This mismatch creates what many men experience as betrayal, not by people, but by reality itself. You did what you were told. You followed the advice, and still you were bypassed. This is not accidental. It is the predictable outcome of applying child-level rules to adult-level competition. Adult power games are subtle because overt conflict is costly. Instead of confrontation, there is exclusion. Instead of rejection, there is delay. Instead of punishment, there is invisibility. Men who were never taught to recognize these signals will miss them until the consequences are irreversible. Your father did not explain this because he may never have named it himself. Many men adapt intuitively but cannot articulate what they've learned. They sense when to stay quiet, when to withdraw, when to endure, but they frame it as that's just how it is, not as a system that can be understood. So the knowledge dies with them. This is why so many men reach their 30s or 40s feeling disoriented. They did everything right, yet feel perpetually behind. They sense they are being evaluated by criteria they were never given. That feeling is not paranoia, it is delayed awareness. And awareness is exactly what was missing from the advice they received. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you was not cynical, it was contextual. He never explained that adulthood does not grade on effort, it grades on impact. That silence is not neutral, it is interpreted. That being dependable does not make you indispensable. Boyhood rewards obedience. Adulthood tests discernment. Without that distinction, men enter adult life expecting protection that no longer exists. When they don't receive it, they feel exposed, confused, and often ashamed, because no one told them the shield was gone. This section matters because it explains the moment of rupture, the instant when inherited advice stops functioning, not gradually but suddenly. And because no one warned you this would happen, the shock feels personal. It isn't. It is the predictable result of a missing lesson, a lesson your father was never equipped or permitted to teach. This is the first piece of the most dangerous advice your father never taught you, and it is the one most men resist the longest. Being good does not earn respect. As a boy, goodness and approval were linked. You behaved well, and authority figures responded positively. Teachers praised you. Parents protected you. The system reinforced a simple equation: good behavior equals positive standing. Your father, shaped by the same equation, passed it on as universal truth, but adult power systems sever that link. Respect in adulthood is not a moral judgment, it is a status assessment. It answers a different question entirely, not is this person good, but what happens if I ignore this person? Men who confuse the two enter adulthood believing decency will shield them. Instead, it often renders them invisible. Your father likely taught you to be fair, kind, and reasonable. What he did not teach you is that fairness does not command attention, kindness does not set boundaries, and reasonableness can be mistaken for compliance. These traits are admirable, but without leverage, they are not respected. This is where the danger lies. Men raised to equate goodness with worth assume that if they are overlooked, it is because they haven't been good enough. So they double down. They become more helpful, more patient, more accommodating. In adult hierarchies, this signals availability, not value, and availability lowers status. Respect emerges from perceived cost. When a man can be bypassed without consequence, his moral qualities become irrelevant. This is not cruelty. It is how systems prioritize. Your father never articulated this because it clashes violently with the ethical framework he hoped would protect you. He taught you to avoid conflict because conflict felt dangerous in his world. But in modern systems, conflict avoidance is not neutral. It communicates that you will absorb pressure quietly, that you won't escalate, that you can be leaned on without resistance. Good men often misinterpret respect as warmth. They confuse politeness with standing. They mistake being liked for being taken seriously. Your father may have believed these were the same thing because, in tightly knit communities, they often were. In fragmented, competitive systems, they are not. This is why men who are openly aggressive, but strategically bounded, often outrank men who are consistently kind, not because aggression is virtuous, but because it clarifies limits. Respect is less about who you are and more about what you permit. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that morality without boundaries does not elevate you, it exposes you. Systems test for resistance. When none is found, they adjust accordingly. This explains a common experience. The good guy who is always consulted but never promoted. Always appreciated but never protected. always relied upon but easily replaced. He is trusted with work, not with authority, because trust and respect are not the same currency. Your father may have believed that eventually goodness is recognized, that time corrects imbalance, that someone somewhere is keeping score. Adult systems do not work that way. They optimize continuously, not morally. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Goodness becomes dangerous when it is predictable. Predictable men are easy to manage, easy to load, easy to overlook. This predictability often comes from rigid moral identity. I'm not the kind of man who pushes back. I don't like confrontation. I'll wait my turn. These identities feel virtuous. In practice, they are constraints others exploit. Your father never explained this because teaching it would have forced him to admit that his own goodness may have been used against him. That realization is painful. So instead, he framed goodness as an end in itself, not as one variable among many. This section is not an argument against morality. It is an argument against moral naivete. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is not be ruthless. It is, being good is not enough. Respect must be anchored to consequence, not character. When there is no cost to dismissing you, no amount of virtue will compensate. Understanding this truth reframes failure. It explains why some men advance without being admirable and why some admirable men stall indefinitely. It reveals that respect is negotiated, not granted. And once you see this, you can no longer rely on inherited rules alone. This is the second piece of the most dangerous advice your father never taught you, and it explains why so many men feel blindsided by betrayal, exclusion, or disrespect they never saw coming. People do not begin relationships, professional or personal, with trust. They begin with tests. Your father rarely named this because tests feel uncomfortable to acknowledge. They sound manipulative, cynical, ungenerous. So instead, he taught you to assume goodwill, to give respect first, to treat people as you want to be treated. These are noble principles, but when applied blindly, they become liabilities. Adult systems do not reward unconditional openness, they probe it. Tests are not announced, they are subtle. A boundary pushed, a favor asked late, credit taken casually, a joke at your expense. A responsibility added without authority. Each moment is diagnostic. People are not asking, is this man good? They are asking, what happens if I take a little more? Men raised on fatherly advice often misread these moments as accidents, miscommunications, one-offs. They assume intent is benign because that is how they were taught to operate. Meanwhile, the system is gathering data, and silence is interpreted as consent. Your father did not explain this because he framed trust as moral posture, not strategic sequence. In families and close-knit communities, trust is often assumed because consequences are enforced socially. In modern, fluid systems, consequences are optional, and so trust must be earned through resistance, not generosity. This is where the danger intensifies. A man who does not recognize tests will fail them by default. He will over-accommodate. He will rationalize disrespect. He will wait for clarity that never arrives. Each failure signals that pressure can be applied without cost, and pressure escalates. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that tests are not personal attacks. They are environmental filters. Systems need to know who pushes back, who absorbs, and who exits. Men who never push back are sorted accordingly. Your father likely believed that pushing back creates enemies. In his world, that may have been true. But in many modern systems, not pushing back creates invisibility. It marks you as safe to overlook, load, or bypass. This creates a cruel paradox for good men. The behavior they believe maintains harmony actually erodes standing. They think patience builds trust. Instead, it builds expectation. Once expectation is set, reversing it feels like aggression, even when it is simply self-respect. Tests also explain why respect often appears to come after conflict, not before. Men who assert limits early may be disliked temporarily, but they are understood. Men who never assert limits are liked, but not considered. Your father never taught you this because teaching it would have required saying something unsettling. People do not know how to treat you until you show them what you will not tolerate. That lesson contradicts everything children are told about being agreeable. So men grow up believing trust is something you offer to receive. In reality, trust is something people grant after discovering they cannot exploit you cheaply. This is not evil, it is adaptive. Systems optimize around least resistance. Understanding this reframes betrayal. Many men feel backstabbed when in fact they were never trusted to begin with. They were evaluated, found compliant, and then used accordingly. The pain comes not from malice, but from misunderstanding the process. This is why the second dangerous truth matters so deeply. Without it, men interpret tests as noise, not signals. They wait for respect instead of establishing parameters. And by the time they realize what's happening, the narrative has already formed. This is someone who doesn't push back. Changing that narrative later is far more costly. Your father could not give you this advice because he wanted you to be liked, not tested. But adulthood does not ask whether you are liked. It asks whether you are defined. Defined men are harder to move. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that trust is not a starting point, it is an outcome. And people test before they trust because systems cannot afford assumptions. This is the third layer of the most dangerous advice your father never taught you, and it is one of the most costly misunderstandings men carry into adulthood. Silence does not mean you're safe. As a child, silence from authority usually meant approval. If a teacher didn't correct you, you assumed you were doing fine. If a parent didn't intervene, you believed you were trusted. Your father reinforced this interpretation because, in structured environments, silence often was reassurance. Adult power systems invert this meaning. In modern hierarchies, silence is rarely neutral. It is informational. It signals observation, evaluation, or disengagement. Men who interpret silence as comfort are often being measured or quietly written off. Your father never explained this because he was trained to endorse silence, to wait, to assume patience would be rewarded. In his world, authority was visible and corrective. In today's systems, authority is diffuse and consequences are delayed. Silence becomes a tool. This is where the danger sharpens. When a man expects feedback and receives none, he fills the gap with optimism. He assumes no news is good news. He continues investing effort, loyalty, and restraint. Meanwhile, decisions are being made without him. The silence is not reassurance, it is distance. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that power rarely explains itself. Authority does not announce disappointment. It does not clarify declining interest. It simply reallocates attention. Silence is how that reallocation begins. Men raised on fatherly patience misread this phase entirely. They believe speaking up would be disruptive. They wait to be called. They interpret quiet as trust. By the time reality becomes visible, missed opportunities, exclusions, replacements, the narrative is already set, and silence has already done its work. Your father may have believed that if something was wrong, someone would tell you. That belief assumes a system invested in your growth. Many systems are not. They are invested in outcomes. If you are no longer central to those outcomes, explanation becomes unnecessary. This is why men who wait for clarity often receive it only after consequences land. Silence also functions as a pressure test. Authority watches how you respond to ambiguity. Do you seek alignment? Do you assert presence? Or do you retreat into compliance? Each response communicates something. Men taught to stay quiet communicate low urgency. And low urgency is interpreted as low value. Your father never named this because silence felt safer than confrontation. In many cases it was. But in modern systems, silence is not humility, it is opacity. And opacity invites assumptions, rarely favorable ones. This misunderstanding explains why men are often shocked by sudden decisions. Layoffs, demotions, relationship endings, exclusions from inner circles. The signs were there, but they were quiet, and men were taught to trust quiet. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that silence is often the last courtesy before removal. This does not mean one should react impulsively to every quiet moment. It means silence must be interpreted, not assumed. It must be contextualized. Authority that values you tends to communicate, even indirectly. Authority that is disengaging withdraws language first. Men raised to wait patiently confuse withdrawal with peace. This is why so many men feel blindsided. They were waiting for a conversation that was never scheduled. They believed maturity meant endurance. They did not realize endurance was being logged as passivity. Your father could not teach you this because it would have required reframing everything he endured quietly as data, not virtue. That reframing threatens identity, so the lesson remained unspoken. Understanding this truth changes how you read environments. It forces you to stop equating quiet with safety. It teaches you that power often speaks last, and only once. This is the fourth truth your father rarely spoke aloud, and it may be the most destabilizing of all. Loyalty is not permanent. It is situational. As a child, loyalty was taught as a virtue that existed above circumstance. Family was forever. Friendship was sacred. Commitment was rewarded. Your father framed loyalty as a moral absolute because, within small and stable systems, it often was. But adult power systems do not operate on absolutes. They operate on alignment. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that loyalty lasts only as long as interests overlap. When those interests diverge, loyalty does not announce its exit. It simply evaporates. Men raised on fatherly ideals interpret loyalty as character. Adult systems treat it as currency. Your father likely believed that if you were loyal long enough, visible enough, patient enough, that loyalty would be remembered. He may have endured years of imbalance under this belief. What he did not explain is that systems do not remember loyalty. They remember usefulness. When usefulness declines, loyalty is quietly redefined as obligation, and obligations are the first things systems shed. This is where men feel betrayed. They remember sacrifices, missed opportunities, times they stayed when they could have left. They assume these deposits created credit, but modern systems do not keep moral ledgers. They keep performance metrics, influence maps, and risk calculations. And loyalty without leverage does not appear on any of them. Your father never taught you this because it collides directly with how he wanted to see himself. To admit that loyalty is conditional would mean admitting that his own loyalty may not have been honored, that his endurance may not have been rewarded. That realization is painful. So the lesson stayed hidden behind virtue. But men who believe loyalty is permanent behave differently. They overcommit. They reveal vulnerabilities prematurely. They delay exit because leaving feels like betrayal. Meanwhile, the system is already preparing alternatives. This asymmetry is deadly. Conditional loyalty explains why men are often shocked when relationships, workplaces, or alliances dissolve without warning. They believed time invested created obligation. The system believed alignment had expired. And no one corrected them. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that loyalty must be continuously renegotiated, not emotionally, but structurally. It survives only when there is mutual cost to breaking it. This is not cynicism, it is observation. Notice how loyalty flows upward less reliably than it flows downward. Subordinates are expected to be loyal. Authority is expected to be strategic. Your father taught you loyalty as obedience. He did not teach you loyalty as exchange. This distinction matters. Men who anchor their identity to loyalty struggle to adapt when conditions change. They feel morally bound even when strategically abandoned. They stay too long. They absorb losses quietly. They wait for recognition that never comes. And when the break finally happens, They experience it as betrayal, because they were never taught that loyalty ends without ceremony. Your father could not prepare you for this without risking your innocence, so he framed loyalty as a virtue that protects. In adulthood, it protects only when paired with leverage, scarcity, or consequence. Understanding this truth does not require abandoning loyalty. It requires redefining it. Loyalty without reciprocity is submission. Loyalty without exit is captivity. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that staying is not always honorable, and leaving is not always betrayal. Adult power systems respect those who can walk away more than those who cannot. Loyalty is strongest when it is chosen repeatedly, not endured silently. This is the final truth your father almost never articulated, and it completes the pattern behind the most dangerous advice your father never taught you. Replacement happens quietly. As a boy, endings were announced. You were told when something was wrong. You were corrected before consequences arrived. Authority explained transitions. Your father reinforced this expectation because, in supervised systems, replacement is preceded by warning. Adult power systems do not work that way. Replacement is not a moral decision. It is an optimization, and optimization does not pause to explain itself. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that no one tells you when you're being phased out. They reduce information first, then access, then relevance. By the time replacement is visible, it has already happened. Men raised on fairness expect notice. They believe tenure buys transparency. They assume effort earns conversation, so they wait. They interpret reduced communication as temporary noise. They assume loyalty will trigger warning. It does not. Authority avoids warning because warning invites resistance. Resistance increases cost. Quiet replacement is efficient, and efficiency, not decency, is the operating principle. Your father never explained this because he believed decency governed outcomes. In his world, it often did. In modern systems, outcomes govern decency. This truth explains a recurring shock. Men discovering they were replaced without conflict, without critique, without closure. They were not rejected, they were rendered unnecessary. And necessity, not virtue, is the currency of survival. Men who do not understand this misread early signals, meetings they're no longer invited to, decisions made without their input, responsibilities reassigned temporarily. These are not oversights, they are staging. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that replacement begins long before removal. And because it happens quietly, only men trained to read absence notice it in time. Fathers taught sons to wait for instruction. Adult systems reward those who notice drift. Replacement also explains why sudden endings feel cruel. They are not sudden. They are simply the first visible moment of a process that began earlier. Men raised on transparency experience this as betrayal because they expected a conversation that was never scheduled. Your father could not prepare you for this without teaching suspicion, so he taught patience. But patience in a system that does not announce change becomes blindness. This is why men who rely solely on inherited advice often lose position without understanding how. They were behaving well while becoming optional. They were loyal while becoming replaceable. They were quiet while being forgotten. And silence did not protect them. Understanding this truth reframes vigilance. It does not demand paranoia. It demands awareness. It requires noticing when your presence no longer changes outcomes, when your absence no longer creates cost. Because once cost disappears, replacement is inevitable. Your father never taught you this because it would have forced him to admit that security is temporary, that roles expire, that stability is rented, not owned. Those are not comforting lessons to give a child, but they are essential lessons for an adult. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that fairness does not precede replacement. Replacement precedes explanation. if explanation comes at all. And the men who survive longest are not the most moral, but the most aware of when they are becoming optional. By this point, the pattern behind the most dangerous advice your father never taught you should be visible, not as a theory, but as a recurring experience. This section exists to shift you from exposure to defense. Because once you understand what was missing, the next risk is repeating it unconsciously. The first trap left by missing advice is overinterpretation of fairness. Men raised on fatherly principles often assume systems are neutral by default. When outcomes feel unfair, they search for moral explanations instead of structural ones. They ask, "What did I do wrong?" instead of "What changed around me?" This internalization delays correction. Systems do not punish you for being unfairly treated. They reward you for adapting. Men who stay stuck in moral self-audits often miss the window where adjustment was still possible. The second trap is delayed boundary setting. Fathers taught sons to be patient, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to avoid confrontation. In adulthood, this translates into waiting too long to define limits. By the time boundaries are asserted, the environment has already normalized overreach. This creates resistance backlash. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that early boundaries feel uncomfortable, but late boundaries feel hostile. Systems accept resistance only before expectations solidify. Men who wait for certainty before pushing back often push back after they are already categorized. The third trap is mistaking appreciation for protection. Men raised on moral reinforcement respond strongly to praise. "You're reliable. We trust you. We appreciate you." These signals feel like security. In reality, they often indicate dependency without authority. Appreciation without leverage is not safety. It is load-bearing. Your father may have believed appreciation equaled value. In modern systems, value is measured by consequence, not compliments. Men who rely on appreciation signals instead of influence signals remain vulnerable to quiet displacement. The fourth trap is loyalty inertia. Once committed, men raised on fatherly ideals hesitate to reassess alignment. They fear appearing disloyal. They rationalize imbalance. They absorb losses quietly because leaving feels like failure. But systems rarely reward endurance without leverage. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that staying too long teaches others how little it costs to keep you. Loyalty becomes expected, not valued, and expected things are easily replaced. The fifth trap is silence misinterpretation. As explored earlier, men often interpret silence as stability. They assume no feedback means no problem. In reality, silence often marks the transition from engagement to evaluation, or from evaluation to disengagement. Men who do not act during silence often act too late. Recognizing this trap requires reframing silence as data, not reassurance. It requires asking what information flow has changed and why. The sixth trap is identity attachment. Men raised on moral advice often anchor their self-worth to being the good one, the reliable one, the loyal one. These identities feel stabilizing, but when systems change, identity rigidity becomes fragility. If who you are depends on how others use you, you are vulnerable the moment they stop. Your father never taught you to detach identity from role because roles were more stable in his world. In modern systems, roles expire quickly. Men who survive learn to separate character from position. This section is defensive because it reframes patterns before they harden into fate. The goal is not suspicion, it is calibration, to see when inherited advice is helping and when it is quietly costing you. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you was not malicious, it was incomplete. Recognizing the traps left by that incompleteness allows you to update without resentment. You are not betraying your upbringing by seeing clearly. You are finishing an education that was never completed. At this stage, the danger is no longer ignorance. It is overcorrection. When men finally recognize the most dangerous advice their father never taught them, the instinctive reaction is rejection of morality, of restraint, of patience itself. This section exists to prevent that mistake. Because the goal is not to abandon your father's values, but to remove them from positions they were never meant to occupy. Morals are not strategies, they are constraints. Your father taught you how to be decent. He did not teach you how to survive environments that do not reward decency consistently. Confusing the two is what creates damage. Separating them is what restores control. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that values should guide behavior, not dictate positioning. Adult survival requires situational awareness, knowing when a value protects you and when it exposes you. For example, honesty is a virtue, but radical transparency in hostile systems becomes self-sabotage. Loyalty is a virtue, but loyalty without leverage becomes entrapment. Patience is a virtue, but patience in the presence of decline becomes denial. Your father likely practiced these virtues selectively, even if he never named the distinction. Many men do. They learn through pain when to stay quiet and when to assert. But because they never articulate the rule, they pass down the virtue without the filter. You inherited the principle, not the context. Separating morals from survival means understanding that values do not require self-erasure. Being ethical does not mean being available. Being respectful does not mean being silent. Being loyal does not mean being immobile. Adult systems respect men who can hold values without being governed by them. This separation also resolves internal conflict. Many men experience guilt when asserting boundaries, leaving situations, or declining obligations. That guilt comes from applying family-level ethics to system-level dynamics. Families are built on unconditional bonds. Systems are built on conditional alignment. Applying family ethics to systems creates vulnerability. Your father did not explain this because it would have sounded like permission to be selfish. But survival is not selfishness, it is calibration. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you is that you can remain principled without remaining predictable. Predictability is what systems exploit, not morality. Separating these concepts allows you to keep your character while changing your posture. You stop expecting fairness where there is none. You stop over-investing where reciprocity has declined. You stop mistaking endurance for honor. This is not cynicism, it is clarity. Men who fail to make this separation often swing between extremes. Either they remain overly compliant and resentful, or they reject morality entirely and become erratic. Both paths lead to instability. The balanced path is integration. Integration means your morals inform your decisions, but awareness determines your timing. You choose when to speak, when to stay, when to leave, not because it feels virtuous, but because it preserves agency. Your father gave you values to keep you safe in his world. You must now place those values into a different operating system. This is the quiet maturation fathers often hope their sons will achieve on their own. Not blind obedience, not rebellion, but discernment. Separating fatherly morals from adult survival does not dishonor your upbringing. It completes it. It turns inherited rules into conscious choices. At the end of this examination, one truth should be clear. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you was not withheld out of malice, but out of limitation. He gave you what he could, what worked, what kept him intact. But adulthood demanded more than inheritance. This final section is not about blame. It is about responsibility. Because once you see what was missing, you can no longer pretend it isn't your task to supply it. The advice you must teach yourself now begins with a single shift. Stop expecting the world to complete your upbringing. No system will pause to explain its rules. No authority will announce when your inherited lessons stop serving you. That realization is not cruel, it is clarifying. Your father taught you how to be good. You must now learn when goodness is enough and when it is not. This does not mean discarding values. It means relocating them. Values belong in your character, not as assumptions about how others will behave. When you expect morality from systems designed for efficiency, you misplace your trust. The advice you must teach yourself now is situational awareness. Awareness that respect follows consequence, not intention. Awareness that trust follows resistance, not generosity. Awareness that silence is information, not reassurance. Awareness that loyalty must be mutual to be meaningful. Awareness that replacement happens quietly and early. None of this requires becoming ruthless. It requires becoming precise. Precision allows you to stay principled without being naive. It allows you to keep dignity without becoming rigid. It allows you to choose restraint instead of being trapped by it. This is the maturation your father may have hoped you would reach, but could not articulate. Teaching yourself this advice also means forgiving the gap, not excusing it, understanding it. Your father was navigating his own constraints. He passed down what protected him. You are now navigating a different terrain. The danger was not the advice he gave you. It was believing it was complete. When you accept that, resentment dissolves into clarity. You stop seeing your past as betrayal and start seeing it as preparation for a different phase. And here is the final, quiet truth. Men who survive modern systems without losing themselves are not those who reject their upbringing, but those who update it consciously. They do not become cruel. They become unreadable. They do not abandon loyalty. They make it conditional. They do not reject patience. They attach it to trajectory. They do not stop being good men. They stop being unguarded ones. The most dangerous advice your father never taught you was not a single sentence. It was a framework, a way of reading the world that only becomes visible after the old one fails. You are not late for learning it. You are right on time. Because the moment you can name what was missing is the moment you are no longer ruled by it. And that, more than any lesson passed down, is where adulthood truly begins.